Hello and welcome to day 10 of Learning the Names of God. Today's name is Jehovah JIREH, a name that you may be somewhat familiar with. There is a not so new, but a recent song that's released about called Jehovah JIREH. And so just in case you don't know what it means, Jehovah JIREH means the Lord will provide. And some of you, if you have walked with God for any period of time, know that God can be trusted to provide. Sometimes when we first begin, we're a little hesitant, we're nervous, we're not sure what this new relationship with God is going to be about. But again, if you have served him for any period of time, if you have grown and developed in your relationship, he's come through for you over and over again, and you know to give him the credit for that he will indeed provide. Well, there is a man, the term Jehovah Jireh comes from an experience that a man had with God in the Bible named Abraham. We spoke about him a couple of days before when we did the name El Rohi. So and I think some people say El Roy, so there's different pronunciation, but we spoke about him the other day because we talked about how he and his wife he had gotten this promise from God that his descendants were going to be many. And his wife got a little tired of waiting. And so she told him to sleep with her maidservant, Hagar. And of course, two women in one house doesn't really go that well, right? And so we talked about what happened with all of that. Well, eventually, Sarah did become pregnant just as God had said. And she and Abraham had a son named Isaac. And several years after they had Isaac, God came to Abraham and asked the unthinkable. He asked Abraham to sacrifice his son. When I say unthinkable, we think, well, he says he's going to have all these descendants. How's he going to have all these descendants if he has to kill his son? These are all the questions that we're thinking. But Abraham doesn't think that because he has history with God. And that history has shown him that God could be trusted. That history has shown him that God has proven to be who he says he is, that he is the all-sufficient one, that he is the all-sustainable one, that he is God. And so Jehovah God makes this request of Abraham, and he doesn't hesitate. The Bible tells us the next day he heads out to accomplish and do what God had commanded him to do. It says that he rose early in the morning. So let's pick up with verse 6. Abraham, he gets his son Isaac. They're traveling to Mount Moriah, and he is walking along, I'm sure thinking about it, but he's already resolute in his mind. He's made the decision that this is what he's going to do. So in verse 6 of Genesis chapter 22, it says, so Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. He took the fire in his hand and a knife, and the two of them went together. But Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. Then he said, look, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? And Abraham said, my son, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering. So the two of them went together. And they came to a place which God had told him. Abraham built an altar, placed the wood in order, and bound Isaac and placed him on the altar. And Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord said to him called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. So he said, here I am. And he said, do not lay a hand on this lad or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Then Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and there behind him was a ram caught in the thicket by its horns. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up for a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham named the place, the Lord will provide. As it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord is provided. So you see, God did provide. Abraham trusted in God. He proved himself, and he did not withhold the one thing that God asked him, which would likely be the most precious thing to him, because in his eyes, that Isaac was representative of the promise that God had given to him. And so some of you may be struggling with your relationship with God. Maybe you haven't even accepted God and you don't have a relationship with him because you don't know if you can trust him. He might be like people you know. He might be human. Let me assure you that's not the case. God is 100% reliable. He is faithful and he is true, and he always keeps his word. The relationship that Abraham had with God was developed over time, over many, many years. When this situation happened, it's believed that he was well over 120 years old, and he had walked with God for over 50 years. So once you get depth in your relationship with God, once you spend time in the Word, you allow the Holy Spirit to tutor and train you, you begin to know that He is the God who will provide. Provision becomes no question. Whatever you need, God is able to provide it. So if you have not experienced Him, if you have not put your trust in Him, if you have not put your confidence in Him, now is the time. He is Jehovah Jireh. The Lord will provide.